What's up everybody, AnimeX here, and in this video I will be starting yet another new video series on the channel. This is something that I think would be pretty educational for a lot of people, either just getting into manga analysis, or even people trying to write their own stories themselves. Now, as the title and thumbnail suggests, in this video I will be dissecting manga, and specifically I will be dissecting plots. Now you may be wondering, what do I mean when I say dissecting manga and dissecting plot? In this video series, the goal is for me to dissect the very intricate and multiple aspects that manga have as a whole, and the things that make up what manga truly is. This will go into characters, plot, villains, fight scenes, conflict, all that kind of good stuff. But today we're going to start off with the thing that you need first when you're making a manga. I'll be tackling this from two separate angles. I'll be tackling it from the fan side, and I'll also be tackling it from the side, or for the perspective of someone who's actually trying to construct these things, and try to tackle it from the authorial side of this, right? I think that's kind of an underrated side, and a side that isn't as talked about as much as I think it should be. So I'll be trying to tackle both in this video today. Just sit back, kick back, get your food, get your snacks, get your drink, and let's dive right into this dissection. Now, the first thing that I think is required when trying to dissect what plot is, specifically within the realm of manga and anime, is to just go over the general meaning of plot and what people most likely would interpret it as on face value. A plot would essentially be the main events of a play, novel, movie, or similar work, in this case being a manga, devised and presented by the writer as an interrelated sequence, right? That is basically the textbook definition for what plot is, and I'll be really explaining that in more detail. First, I'd like to take it from the writer's side. How would you go about constructing a plot if you, say, were an author, or if you were trying to write a manga, or at least write out the general plot of a manga, right? What makes a plot interesting? What makes it good? How would you break down the steps to making a good plot? How would you break down the steps to making something that is it's heralded for its good plot? Say something like Attack on Titan, or say something like The Promised Neverland. Well, the first step, I would say, as someone who's been trying to write stories myself, to making a good plot is to outline general ideas that you have and try to come up with some unique concepts. Now, when I say unique concepts, I don't mean completely original concepts. That's something that I think people get tripped up on. They try to judge a plot based on originality, when originality doesn't really have to play a part into your enjoyment of a manga. Say you take something like Black Clover or My Hero Academia. These two things aren't completely original in terms of how their plot starts off, and how they start their anime/manga off. They are both take inspiration from previous anime and manga, and honestly, when I hear that people are like downplaying these manga for that sole reason, I think it's a little stupid in my opinion, because like, to say that a plot is only good if it's completely original is to really just hold the idea that anything could be completely original without any inspiration. People say that, oh, they're copying Naruto, or they're taking a lot of inspiration from Naruto in the beginning of their plot, which is fine, right? But Naruto has also taken inspiration from things that came before it, say its predecessor Hunter x Hunter, right? And people don't get on Naruto for things like that. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say these two manga or these three manga are on the same level, but I think that this explanation or this example applies. Taking inspiration from something does not make it worse or better, right? Originality, to a degree, doesn't impact your manga. Now, if you're ripping your manga straight from something else, yes, but I'm saying if you take inspiration from something, that does not inherently mean that your work of art is worse. What I mean when I say a unique take is basically the execution of this plot. For example, right? Say we take something like Naruto, and Naruto is the journey of a kid basically being on the very edge of society, basically being marginalized, and someone who wants to become Hokage, someone who wants to basically make everybody acknowledge him even though he started at the bottom of the barrel, right? It's a pretty general synopsis for Naruto. Obviously, you can get into much more detail and much more character-related things, much more even plot-related things, but that is the general synopsis. You could go about in many ways. You can go about that as an underdog story. You can go about that in a way to show the world, basically the world building, which is an aspect of manga that is going to be interesting to cover. Or you could take this manga in a way that's very plot driven, something that isn't actually like Naruto, and something that's more like, say, Death Note, or say, like my previous examples, The Promised Neverland or Attack on Titan. While this does rely on your characters being good, it also does rely on the plot actually moving this story forward, and the plot being what really intrigues you. The plot twists, the way that the plot develops, and the way that the world seems to be flowing and the story seems to be unfolding around you. So the first thing is, right, you have to have your general plot. You need to decide if you want your plot to drive the story or if you want your characters to drive the story. If you do want your plot to drive the story, you need to be able to look at your general story and be able to take a concept that may not be completely original and take it in an interesting or unique way. Or else your plot twists, all of these things will seem contrived, or they'll seem like they're just based off of something else, which with plot twists and things like that, you want them to be noticeable, you want them to be foreshadowed, but you never want them to be predictable. A predictable plot twist is not really a plot twist, right? It's not very interesting. I don't want to go too deep into spoilers, but there are just in the two examples that I've named so many times, Promised Neverland and Attack on Titan, there are many examples of plot twists that are not contrived because they're built up to, right? They're talked about, they're even foreshadowed slightly, or not even slightly, they're foreshadowed in some very interesting and unique ways, but yet they're still surprising to most viewers that watch or read them for the first time, right? The foreshadowing is also very important. That's something you need to keep in mind from your authorial standpoint, right? How can you foreshadow what's to come, right? Because foreshadowing, it makes the read so much better on a second viewing, right? Or a second read. Because if you can foreshadow what's happening, right? Your plot twists don't seem contrived, or they don't seem just coming out of left field in order for shock value, right? You never want to just make up a plot twist in order to shock your audience. You want your plot to drive everything forward, the world and the characters that you're writing about. Now, the next thing that you guys have probably heard about if you've watched videos of this nature is you want to split your plot, and however small it may be. If you want to split the manga, how you'd build this into chapters, into volumes, you need to have a structure. One structure that is very commonly used, mostly in films, I've heard it referenced, is the 3-act structure. Now, for all those that haven't really heard of this, for some reason, I'll quickly explain. The 3-act structure goes like this. The first act is the introduction to these characters. It basically opens you up to them and leads up to the inciting incident. The inciting incident basically leads to the second act. The second act takes up about half of your overall story if you're talking about a movie. Then you come in with the third act, which is basically the conclusion or the climax of the story. And in combination with the first act, it takes up about the other half of the story approximately. Now, you want to be able to build your story and structure it, right? Because without structure, and your story will just be confusing and convoluted, and it'll really not have too much, it won't really make too much sense upon viewing it, right? You don't want a confusing plot. You never want something that is impossible to follow or very difficult to follow, because that just makes for a boring read or a very disinteresting read, which is something that you never want your plot to be described as. So to summarize the last step, it's basically you need to have structure and obviously one example is a 3-act structure. There's also things such as the 5-act structure, the 7-act structure, and there are many different ways for you to structure your story depending on how you want it to be paced and how you want the overall plot to flow. But you do need to make sure and keep in mind that you do have structure within your story. So to summarize, what I think are some of the most important things when going over a plot is the structure of the plot. You need to decide how much of an impact the plot is going to have on your story, right? Like I said, you can have character-driven manga and anime, or you can have plot-driven manga and anime. If you're having a character-driven one, then plot isn't as important, right? It is still very important for you to have a decent plot, an understandable plot, and a plot that's interesting, but you need to understand that the characters are going to drive it forward. But if you are having a story that is completely driven by the plot twist and by the way that the story unfolds, you need to heavily buckle down and make sure that you realize that your story needs to be interesting, it needs to be engaging throughout the entire thing. There needs to be foreshadowing for plot twist or for reveals that you have, or else they'll fall flat and they'll be seen as contrived or just come out of nowhere, right? Which is something that you never want to have. Some of the worst things in anime and manga, right, are when you feel like there's a plot twist and there's been no foreshadowing towards it, and there's really been like it just comes out of nowhere and it just falls flat, which is something you never want. Now, that was all from the stance of somebody who was trying to write a story. Now, if you look at it from the viewer's perspective and what makes a good plot from, say, someone like me, someone who is someone who you could say likes anime or manga just a little bit maybe, and just how would someone like me enjoy plot, or what aspects of it would be enjoyable. Now, I can only speak from my experience when I say what I personally enjoy, right, from a subjective standpoint, but it would basically be very similar to how I laid out before. Is the plot interesting? Does it lead me along a similar story, and is it structured in a way where I can clearly follow along and see the escalation of either of power, of the stakes, of the drive for these characters, right? If you could continuously see this escalation of the entire story, it's a continuous escalation that is gradual throughout the story. You never want to go 0 to 100 unless you are trying to give your viewers whiplash, and only in very specific cases can you go from 0 to 100 without it being very jarring for your reader. You do want a gradual escalation of whatever you're trying to escalate. You want to make sure that your escalation is very gradual, or else you can reach your peak of your escalation and have nowhere else to go, meaning that you have to try to go further and further, making the plot weaker and weaker. A good example of plot escalation and escalation of stakes in general that I want to bring up is personally my favorite anime currently, Code Geass. I think that Code Geass has an excellent escalation of stakes. We see that Lelouch, slight spoilers for everybody who hasn't watched Code Geass. I won't be getting into the ending or anything like that, but I will be mentioning slight spoilers. We do see that Lelouch goes from just, he has, of course, we know that his goal is to take over Britannia and basically just, make sure that he has his goal, right? He has his goal of taking over Britannia and basically making everything a peaceful and equal plane, as keeping it place safe for Nunnally, and all that good stuff. For all of you that haven't watched Code Geass, this may be very confusing. But anyways, he has his grand goal, right? But it doesn't get into the highest stakes that it can be in the first couple of episodes, or even the first season, really. We just see that gradually, through each battle that he goes through each mind game that he maneuvers through each chess game, this mind game of chess, we see that his plans escalate further and further and further until it reaches its climax and it ends off perfectly. You have to build up your story in a way that is conducive to you, it being interesting throughout the entire way. You can't, if you refuse to escalate, or if you ignore the escalation process as a whole, you just have a flat story. But if you escalate your story too quickly, to too high of a degree, the stakes become flat as well. You just get the same result as if you were to do no escalation at all. And it is a little bit of a balance beam. It's a little bit of a balancing act in order to try to find just the perfect middle ground. But when you do find that, and as a viewer, when you do get to watch or read this perfect middle ground, you have something that's just utterly spectacular, and something that's just, you could just enjoy and read or watch so many times over and over and over, which is why I think things like Code Geass, things like Attack on Titan, things like Death Note, things like The Promised Neverland, all of them are so enjoyable to watch, even on multiple viewings, because you get more insight into these characters and the story that they're trying to tell as you continuously watch them. So, with that being said, I think that's all I have to say for the plot and for the first part of this Dissecting Manga series. Now, like I said, that is all I have for you guys today. Just another predictions video, since I know a lot of you guys did want another one on The Promised Neverland, seeing as how I actually didn't get around to it in the first week of my my revival arc for the channel. I hope you guys did enjoy this, and I hope that this video did, if not inspire you to watch it or get into the manga, at least did give you a little bit of a hint of curiosity to check it out, and just give Promised Neverland a little bit of a chance. I'd say, honestly, if by the first or second episode you're not hooked, Promised Neverland is probably just not something for you. Although, as someone who enjoys it so thoroughly, and someone who can rewatch the entire season within the span of one night, I find it hard to believe that most people would not find The Promised Neverland enjoyable. If you like detailed plot twist, smart mind games, and just overall a general, well-written, emotional story, The Promised Neverland is something that I'd recommend reading or watching. I hope that I'm now speaking to some new Promised Neverland fans, as well as the ones that like Promised Neverland previously to making this video. Hope you guys are staying safe out there, not getting sick, social distancing, all that good stuff. And with all that out of the way, if you guys did enjoy, want more, let me know in the comment section down below. Make sure to subscribe, do all that good stuff so you can keep up with all the content and get notifications for all that good stuff. And as always, guys, this is Anime X signing off.